Welcome to the Blackwater Ledger, where we unspool the histories that refuse to stay buried. Tonight we travel not to a cotton empire with white columns, but to a cold, cobalt lake cradled by the green mountains of Vermont. Locals call it Blackwater, though on a clear morning it shines like hammered silver. Beneath that brightness lies a town no map prints anymore, Grafton Hollow, drowned for a hydroelectric project in 1892. Its steeple and slate roofs swallowed so a new city far away could have light. On certain nights, when the turbines idle and the surface goes glass still, the lake gives back what it took, a tolling no one can trace, not the boys, not the dam, a bell from under the water. 3 notes only, never a full peal, 3 as if a hand remembers how to ring but has forgotten why. The Harrow family learned the why. Or enough of it to lock their doors before sunset and never speak of red scarves again. In the winter of 1905, a schoolteacher named Alma Pike walked across the Blackwater Dam with her notebook tucked under her shawl and her muffler biting at the wind. She had an odd hobby for a woman who taught sums and penmanship. She collected rumors the way other women collected cameo brooches. Alma kept them pressed flat between the same pages where she listed the names of absentees and the cost of chalk. Her entry that January reads, "Saw Mrs. Harrow at the mill store, asked after Ruth's 17th next month." Mrs. H. smiled but did not answer. Her smile looked like a door painted shut. Storekeeper Whitaker says the Harrows always keep their girls home the week of their 17th. Says it's nothing but mountain nonsense. Says a bell cannot ring water. I heard it last Sunday, it can. Ruth Harrow, 3rd of 4 children. A picture of a girl with a pitcher's eyes. They held and poured more than they should. She laughed too easy and apologized for it later, as if joy were a jar she'd left open. If you were to pick the child who would anchor a town, you'd have picked Ruth. That's the joke the lake likes best. The Harrows lived in a clapboard salt box on the rise above Spinner's Cove. The little swale where the drowned town's main street ran now as a shadow across the lakebed. On late summer days you could see, if you squinted right, a pale line under the water like a road to nowhere. On winter nights, when the wind cut the lake into panes, the line sharpened, a street that had learned to breathe water waiting. To the family and the rule. Elias Harrow was a millwright at the dam. He had the hands of a man who fixes things that were built to never break, hands always a little surprised to find themselves outmatched and never admitting it. Mara Harrow, his wife, had come from a coastal town and never quite forgiven the mountains. She kept a glass harmonica in a velvet-lined box, a strange, illicit instrument of stacked crystal bowls turned by a treadle. It's for headaches. He told the doctor she played it when the children were sick or the wind would not lie down. The sound it made, water singing through glass, made you think of what a bell would say if no one expected it to be brave. There were 4 Harrow children, Jonah 19, Ruth 16 going on 17 on February 11th, me 14 and Sela's 8. Their mother's rule, spoken often enough to slick the syllables smooth, was simple: no daughters on Blackwater after dusk. It sounded absurd until you'd heard the bell yourself and knew it was only 3 notes and somehow worse for being so. Mara never said where the rule came from, but everyone in Grafton knew that Mara's grandmother had been born in Old Grafton, the drowned one, and that on the day the river was backed up and the valley became a mirror, the women of the hollow tied strips of red cloth around their sleeves and stood on the church steps to watch the water climb. The last congregation of a town that already had a funeral planned. Red is for the living, they said, so our dead can see where to find us. Sometimes a rule is a ribbon that remembers what it once tied. The scarf appeared the 2nd week of February, folded on the Harrow doorstep as neat as a bill. No note, no fray. The wool was dyed a red that knew it was red, the very color that makes a fox glove its bite and a cardinal its crown. Mara lifted the scarf the way you lift a jar you're afraid holds a hornet. The wool was dry, though snow had fallen all morning. "Whose is it?" Sela's asked, and received the sort of look that grows a boy old enough to know not to ask the second time. Mara set the scarf atop the glass harmonica's box and did not touch it again. That night the bell tolled 3 notes. Jonah, who had not believed until he did, left his bed and went to the window with his jaw clenched the way a jaw learns to keep from saying what it is thinking. Ruth woke, too. She stood barefoot by the stove, warming her toes on the iron, and listened. "It sounds like it's underwater," she whispered and looked ashamed for saying something that obvious. It is underwater, Me said from the table where she'd been pretending to be asleep. All the worst things are if you think about them. Go back to bed, Elias said from the doorway, and found that his voice shook. He had helped install the spillway gates. He knew the lock schedules and the watch rotations and the personality of water, how it behaves like a man in a crowd until it remembers it is a nation. He did not know how to explain why a bell could carry up from a roof 40 feet under. He did not know why the 3 notes always made him think of a hand on a shoulder, firm, guiding, not unkind. The morning of her birthday, Ruth cut off her braid. She did it with kitchen shears. Standing between the stove and the north window where ice made a lace no one would wear. The braid fell with a dull sound, heavier than hair has any right to be, like something that had stored a winter and was ready to give it back. Mara did not shout. She gathered the braid and bound it with twine and wrapped it in newsprint and put it in the bread tin. I'm not offering it, Ruth said, as if her mother had accused her of praying in a language she did not believe. It's mine. Mara looked at her a long time. So is the lake, she said, and see where it lives. Ruth went outside and walked the ridge until the white of the world bled into sky. She thought of the old photographs at the library, women standing outside a timber church with sashes of red. She thought of the way the bell sounded kind. That was the worst of it. You can hide from what means to hurt you. It's harder to hide from what sounds like your name. At noon, Alma Pike found Ruth's second-hand boots on the schoolhouse steps, melted snow cupping the leather-like hands. Inside, the fire was high and the room was empty, which is a particular kind of profane. Alma wrote in her notebook, Ruth H. did not come to lessons, found boots, no girl, went at once to Harrow House. Mrs. H. already knew. How can a woman look like a door and a window at once? Elias searched the banks. Jonah took a skiff, though Mara shouted until her voice broke that he must not. Me sat at the table and folded the red scarf, unfolded it, folded it again, and every fold felt like a word she did not know how to say. At the dam, the foreman halted the late afternoon release. The turbine slowed to a hum a heartbeat might choose as a friend. Men who mocked Sunday crept to the lake's edge and crossed themselves with mittened hands because winter asks that you choose any god you can grip. They found nothing, no track on the crusted snow, no break in the ice, no tier of fabric where the sumac claws the path down to Spinner's Cove. At sunset, when the light made of every window an eye, the bell tolled 3 notes and was done. Mara did not sit Shiva. She set 4 places and refused to be told that one should be left empty. They ate stew no one tasted. After supper, she lifted the glass harmonica from its box and turned the treadle with her foot and set her wet fingers to the rims. The sound came thin at first, then flowered, then thinned again until you had to lean in to be sure you were hearing it, and in the lining you made of your throat a window. Me put her cheek on her arms and listened the way a river listens to rock long enough to find a shape it can take. Jonah stood in the doorway and did not come in. Silas fell asleep under the table with his hand pressed to the floorboards as if the house might sail off if he didn't hold it. The harmonica's tones rose and fell like a prayer in a church with the doors open to a road that nobody trusts. When Mara stopped, there was silence, the kind that isn't a relief. Then humming, not from the lake, not from the stove, humming that had no mouth and did not need one. It came from the walls, the beams, the papered plaster, the bread tin where a braid lay cooling into a relic. Do you hear it? Me asked, though she knew they did. She needed the world to be ordinary enough for question. It's the wind, Elias said, and they let him say it because sometimes the man of a house needs his lie to keep his hands steady. The humming braided itself into 3 notes and then became something that was not notes anymore, but the thing notes wished they were. Mara lifted the scarf and felt its wool warm against her palms. Red is for the living, she said, and did not know she was saying it aloud. 2 days later, Alma Pike received an envelope with no stamp. It had been slid under her door before dawn, no address. The paper smelled faintly of pondweed and cold iron. Which is to say it smelled like February pretending it was a promise. Inside was a single sheet. The hand was precise, pretty in the way a school slate is pretty when it has no sums on it yet. Miss Pike. Do not bring the constable, do not stand on the dam at night. Do not teach the small ones that the lake is a map they can read without a guide. Tell them stories of deserts, tell them of thresh and wheat in any place where water mines itself. There is a street under Blackwater where our dead walk as if death were a change of address, not a conclusion. There is a bell that rings for them at meal times. It has rung 3 times for me, and I am not hungry anymore. Red is for the living. Send none, Ruth Harrow. Alma sat with the letter and the quiet and tried to think of the trick that would make her admire it as clever and not weep as if it were true. She failed at both. She took the page to the Harrows and laid it on the kitchen table. Elias read it twice and then placed it back on the wood with the care a man reserves for something too light to be trusted. "It's her hand," he said. "It's her school hand." His voice did not break anywhere. Sometimes a voice is a bridge too strong for the river it crosses. Mara did not touch the letter. She took the bread tin down and unwrapped the braid and laid it beside the words. She stared at both as if the wool could sew hair to paper and make a girl out of ink and keratin. She looked at the red scarf. "It's not ours," she said. "It never was." That night the bell did not sound. No one slept better for it, on the 4th day. After the kind of morning that opens itself like a trap and calls itself weather, Silas slipped out while his brother mended a sled runner and his mother argued softly with a kettle. He carried a stick and a tin soldier missing an arm. He wore one mitten because he could only find one and decided the lake would forgive him the second. He did not go to the dam. He knew to keep away from men who move water with machines. He went down the bone-white path to Spinner's Cove and stepped onto the ice the way a boy steps onto a dare. The ice held. The world can be reasonable right up until it remembers what it is. Silas crouched and peered into the clear pane. He liked how the weeds looked like old handwriting and the air bubbles like coins he was rich enough to leave where they lay. He tapped with his stick and watched the tap trail away into the frozen. He thought he saw a shape down there like a window. He leaned closer and understood that he was looking through a window into a room where a chair had been and a pan still hung on a wall, and a stove's iron belly slept as if there were any sleep left in it at all. A red slice drifted up from the dark and pressed itself against the underside of the ice. It was not a fish. It was not a ribbon. It was a strip of wool as bright as a cardinal's insides. It lay there, a tongue against glass. Silas put his hand on the ice over it as if a palm could weigh what it wanted into staying. His hand burned cold. He pulled back and breathed, and his breath fogged, and for a moment he was the inside of a house, and then the fog cleared and the red was gone. "Silas," the voice was Me's, not panic yet. Panic is loud. She was at the bank with her skirt in both hands, not caring if the hem got dirty, which is how you know sorrow has a schedule. "Come away." He stood. And in standing he heard it, the humming through the ice, through his boots, through his bones grown in a house where water had a name. 3 notes and then no notes. He knew without being told what those notes meant. "Come, now, come. It sounds like Ruth," he said. Me did not argue that it could not. That is not how sisters talk to brothers when the world has rearranged itself. She went onto the ice and took his wrist and did not look down, and later would not remember how she made herself not look. Behind them, at the top of the path, a woman in a gray shawl watched. Me would insist later there was no one there. Silas would insist there was. The only thing anyone agreed on was that when they reached the kitchen, the glass harmonica was out of its box and the red scarf was gone. Mara's hands were wet from the wash basin. She lifted them and water fell from her fingers onto the harmonica's bowls. The instrument sang without a touch. It sang 3 notes only, then nothing. The scarf lay suddenly where it had been, as if someone had set it there and wanted credit for obeying. "It knows our house," Mara said to the room, to the instrument, to the air. "It knows the way in." Elias reached for the scarf. It was warm. When a thing cannot be found, men draw maps. Elias, who hated paper unless it told him the size a rivet should be, spread a chart of Blackwater on the table. The engineers had overlaid the old town with blue lines and numbers that pretended to be depth, but were really discipline. Elias took a pencil and traced the faint memory of Old Main Street as it angled down Spinner's Cove and bent toward the church that once stood where the lake was deepest. Mara took the pencil and in the margin drew a bell, small and neat, with 3 clappers. "They did not build the bell for drowning," she said. "And yet, don't," he said. "What? Talk like that? How should I talk? Like it can be fixed." His voice broke on the last word, and in breaking was a mercy. Me moved her finger along the penciled street. "If you walked here," she said softly, "you'd be walking where air was. You think the lake remembers. That's what the bell is, a reminder." "What is the scarf?" Alma asked quietly. She had returned without being asked. "Some women are invited by sorrow, whether you call them or not." Mara looked out the window. "There are times to tell the story." this was not one. She folded the map, she could not fold the lake. That evening, when the cold turned the trees into instruments and every twig cracked like a key, the bell did not sound. The quiet was a new kind of wrong. Me dreamed of stairs that went down forever and of Ruth on one of the landings, smiling as if the dark were a guest she had been saving the good plates for. When me woke, she could still taste iron. She did not tell anyone. You learn in some houses to ration truth. 3 days after the letter, Jonah found an Edison cylinder in a flour sack behind the tool shed. No one in the house owned a phonograph. The foolishness of recorded voices had not yet earned a place at a table where voices had to prove themselves. The cylinder was wrapped in oiled paper and smelled faintly of the lake, which is to say it smelled of hunger that knows it is patient. Alma had a machine at the schoolhouse. A gift from a Boston cousin whose inventions bred other inventions the way rabbits breed apologies. They gathered there after sunset with the shades drawn and the stove clanging in a way that promised bravado and did not deliver warmth. Alma set the cylinder on the mandrel, cranked the spring, lowered the reproducer. Scratch, see in a seashell. Then a girl's voice, thin with distance and a sweetness you'd break your teeth on if sweetness were something you could bite. If this reaches you. The voice said, I was not stolen. Please, it's not like that. The bell is not a door. It's a reminder where the door is. There are women here and they are not dead. I don't know what the word is for them. They are what the lake uses when it wants hands. Me began to shake so hard Alma put her palms on the girl's shoulders and felt the bird that is a heart. They say every town owes a toll to its own past. I think we were late in paying ours. I am not afraid. My hands are not cold. Please tell Silas not to come on the ice. Tell Jonah not to build the boat. Tell Mother. Back deeper as if the lake had borrowed a throat. Red is for the living, don't bring it here. The cylinder spun on in silence and then stuttered out a sound like cloth torn underwater. Alma lifted the arm with one finger as delicately as a woman lifts a scab. No one spoke, words were poor. The room listened to its own wood shrinking in the cold and tried to decide whether that was proof of life. Jonah stood without his coat and went into the night and did not return until morning. When he came back, his hair rhymed with rhyme and his hands swollen where he had punched the wind. He said, I saw nothing, I heard nothing, I will never leave, and set his jaw like a hinge you cannot oil. Mara took the cylinder home in the pocket of her apron and slept with her hand over it. If anyone had told her she was holding a voice like a mother holds a fever, she would have said she knew and that this was the only medicine left. The constable came at last because men insist on arriving where they were told not to. He brought a team with poles and a man from Montpelier who claimed he could divine wells with a forked branch, which is a sort of honesty. Every town has its dowsers, some wear uniforms. They punched holes along the cove and fed a speaking tube through and called Ruth's name into the water. As if sound were a rope a girl could climb, they hauled up nothing but silence and a glove that did not belong to anyone and a tangle of red wool too fine to be scarf and too coarse to be comfort. The Montpelier man wiped his mouth and said, sometimes water keeps what law does not require it to return. Law requires breath, Alma said, surprising even herself. Law requires paper, the man said, breath is a courtesy. Elias nearly broke his hand on the man's jaw and would have but for Jonah stepping between two lives. At sundown the men left. The lake did not, the house did not, the family did not, the bell did not ring, night did, 3 long sinking notes. Then the faintest suggestion of a chorus beyond the walls, a humming with no words, and the glass whisper of a fingertip on crystal. Alma Pike believed in paper the way some believe in relics, not because it is holy, but because enough hands have touched it to make holiness possible. She went to the county hall with her scarf double-wrapped and her purpose single-minded and requested the old Grafton inundation plans. A clerk with chilblains and a suspicion of women brought out a roll of onion skin sheets that smelled of lamp oil and old decisions. On the margins, a surveyor had drawn the church steeple like a promise and labeled it, St. Hildegard's, bell removed to parsonage unverified, but another hand in softer graphite had added 3 words beside the sketched belfry, never found again. There were also lists, household contents slated for salvage, linen, crockery. A harmonium with 2 cracked reeds, a glass harmonica noted then crossed out in a different ink. Alma underlined the line with her breath. At the bottom of one page an unsigned note, women wish to keep the bell. Men say bell belongs to church, church belongs to God, God belongs to no one, thus to men. Dispute unresolved, water keeps its own counsel. Alma copied the words into her notebook and closed the file as if closing a mouth that might otherwise tell too much. A man who keeps machines alive learns which promises can be bullied. Elias went to the dam superintendent and invented a fault in Gate 3's rack and pinion. Teeth are off, he said, holding up a grease-blackened hand with a fresh cut like proof. If we don't lower her 3 feet for inspection, the spring thaw will chew us clean. Superintendents do not enjoy chewing. Orders went down the line. By dusk, the plan was approved, a partial drawdown at first light. It would not bear the drowned town, not in February, but it would loosen the lake's grip enough to make a shape where a story wanted one. Elias did not tell Mara until the papers were signed. He expected a storm. He received something worse, her agreement. Daylight only, she said, and I go. You don't, he said, I do. She said, and her face had the look the lake wears when it is glass, so smooth you forget it can cut. In the night, me dreamed of stairs that spiraled down a throat of water. On each landing stood a woman with something red, ribbon, sash, shawl, mouth. At the bottom stood Ruth with her hands full of nothing, which me understood was the weightiest thing in the world. Me woke to find, on the bedpost, a single red thread tied in a sailor's knot. It was no thicker than a thought and warmer than a window sun. She touched it and snatched her hand back as if she'd set it on a stove. She did not tell her mother. She tied the thread into her hair where it would look like bravado and not invitation, the heavy pulse of sluice gates. Rushing water that does not argue as it leaves. The lake lowered by hand's width, then another, and the wind changed, gone brittle like an apology snapped in two. At Spinner's Cove, where the shoreline yaws toward the old street, the ice clenched and cracked, and a shape appeared beneath. A lintel of stone with a rusted nail still in it, as if a door had tried to stay shut and the water had convinced it otherwise. Elias, Mara, Jonah, me. And Alma stood on the bank with a length of rope and the sort of silence that keeps soup from boiling over. No one stepped on the ice. They laid planks and tested each footfall, a somber parody of dancing. It's only 3 feet, Jonah said, like a man who means only to drink one more. We can see and not touch. Sight is a touch you don't get blamed for, Alma murmured. They reached the place where the ice thinned to window. Beneath, a doorstone and the ghost of a doormat, and farther down, a scatter of plates like coins in a dry fountain. A child's slate lay half buried in silt, one corner glimmering when the light remembered it had angles. Me lowered the pole. There, she whispered, scratched faintly on the slate, Miss Pye, the rest blurred where the silt had written over it like time correcting an error. Alma's name was a bridge no one could cross. She clung to the sound with her teeth. Ruth, Mara said. Not as a question, as an arithmetic that had too many sums and still came out true. The bell told then 3 small notes, as polite as knuckles on a door. Alma's eyes filled without her permission. Jonah's fingers tightened on the rope until the weave imprinted his skin like a promise he could not redeem. It's not calling you, Mara said to me without looking at her. I know, me said, and did not, on the far bank. Near the alder stand where the snow never quite looks like itself, a figure appeared. A woman in a gray shawl with a face that reassembled itself every time you blinked. She raised a hand. It was not a wave. It was a counting, 1, 2, 3. Elias hissed a prayer that was mostly the names of his children. Mara did not pray. She found in her pocket a brass thimble, her mother's, smoothed by 1,000 hems. She pressed it into Alma's palm. Teacher, she said. If something happens to me, nothing will, Alma said, and hated the poor carpentry of the phrase. If something happens to me, Mara went on, relentless, you will take me and Sila's to my sister in Gloucester. You will cut their hair and change their names. You will teach them deserts. I will teach them deserts anyway, Alma said. Across the cove, the woman's hand completed its count. The 3rd finger folded. The air went thin as if someone had opened a door into a room without enough breath stored. Back, Elias said. They went, not at a run. Running is a kind of prayer the lake loves to answer. That night, Mara brought the glass harmonica to the kitchen table. She did not ask permission from the dark. She did not set the instrument to comfort. She set it to question. Her wet fingers coaxed a minor 3rd, then a bare 5th, then an unresolved 2nd that made the ribs of the house decide whether they still believed in staying ribs. Alma, who understood a chalkboard better than she did music, heard patterns anyway. 3, she said. Always 3, not a melody, a shape. Instruction, Mara said, or etiquette. She played the 3 low, higher, highest, then reversed it, highest, lower, low. From the stovepipe came, faint as regret, an answer, 2 notes half a breath apart. Mara froze, played 2 back. Silence, then 1, a tone so pure it felt like glass taking a thought and setting it down on a windowsill. Me had been coloring the margins of Alma's notebook with the stub of a school pencil. She looked up. If 3 is come and 2 is stay, then 1 is listen. How do you? Jonah demanded, not unkindly and not kindly either. I don't, me said, that's why it's listening. Mara played 1, the harmonica's bowls thrummed. From somewhere in the walls a hum gathered like bees deciding to be a choir. It did not form notes, it formed attention. Mara whispered to the instrument or the air or the person she used to be. Red is for the living. We know we won't bring red. Let my child be where she is. 3 notes answered. Soft as a hand on a brow, come. Mara took her hands away from the glass as if she'd been tricked into touching a story that bites. A boy cannot fight a lake with his fists. He will build a boat. Jonah had a skiff, Amelia, named for a woman who had once laughed at him kindly and not married him. He fitted her for winter water, tarred seams, fuller ribs, a crude-sounding line knotted every 6 feet. He packed a coil of red hemp because it was the strongest line left in the shed, and because he did not know what color means once it is rope. Mara saw the coil and said nothing. A mother who forbids must have more soldiers than a lake. She had none left. Elias put a hand on Jonah's shoulder. Daylight only, he said. Daylight, Jonah lied. The partial drawdown held through the week. Each noon, as if the sun were a sextant and duty a climate, the lake yielded a little more of the drowned geometry. The lintel at Spinner's Cove grew into a doorway. The doorway suggested a hall. Alma saw in the alignment of stone and silt. 2 rooms arguing through a missing wall. On Thursday, the water laid bare a post with iron staples, the hitching rail where horses once dozed while their owners negotiated with God. Embedded in the wood, rusted nearly flat, a small brass plaque winked when the light found a hole in the clouds. They did not step onto the ice. Alma leaned out with the hooked pole. The plaque came free with a sound like a cough. On it, a scripture battered to stammering, let bells call who labor and are rest. Rest, Alma read and shivered. The missing word was almost certainly heavy. She preferred it missing. They brought the plaque home, and for an hour the kitchen smelled like the past pretending to be metal. Silas would not speak of the red under-ice tongue. He stayed near the stove, building towns of spool houses and domino roads. He began to draw with a surety new to him, arches, gables. Bells, his little hand finding lines the way a blindfold finds a mouth. He drew a house with a window that opened downward like a trapdoor. At the window a girl looked up with hair like cut rope. What do you call it? Alma asked gently. He chewed his lip, then wrote carefully across the top, not under. Good name, Alma said. Silas crossed it out and wrote beneath it, not yet. No one corrected his grammar. No one wanted to speak the truth of it into a shape. That evening, when the wind died as if it had run out of road, someone knocked at the Harrow door 3 times, evenly spaced, polite as a ledger. Elias opened it with his body between the gap in the room. No one stood on the step. On the stoop lay a bundle wrapped in oilcloth and tied with a red cord that had not touched snow. Elias did not bring it in. He lifted it with the coal shovel and set it on the porch table as if it might choose to be a flame. Mara untied it. Inside, a white apron Ruth's with a single red thread stitched through the hem, running the length and vanishing where it met the seam. In the apron pocket, a key, small iron with a bow shaped like a clover. Where does it fit? Jonah asked, which is how a brother says who has my sister. In us, Mara said, which is how a mother says I don't know. That night, Mara played 2 notes over and over until the glass went sick with it. The house answered with one as if to say we hear you. The lake did not answer at all, which was an answer. Me went to bed and found her pillow damp. She thought for a foolish instant that she'd cried in her sleep. Then she lifted the linen and smelled it, lake cold, clean as stone, older than sorry. Under the pillow lay another letter, the paper warped as if it had been pressed against a window under water. Me, do not braid the red into your hair. It is accounting. They count by color. I tried to hide mine. It was too late. Tell Jonah not to bring rope. It makes a bridge they can walk. Tell mother to play the notes backward when the bell calls. It will make them pause, not long enough for breath. There are stairs. If you hear the humming, do not look for them. They will look for you. Do not be brave, be clever, be elsewhere. Me took the red thread from her hair. It stuck to her fingers like a decision. She burned it over the stove, and it smelled of wool and salt in a storm far out to sea. The smoke rose, twisted, and vanished into the stovepipe like a rumor changing neighborhoods. "Good girl," Mara said softly without turning from the harmonica. Oarlocks creaking, a hull whispering to black water, a breath held too long. At moonrise, Jonah pushed Amelia into the loosened cove. He had told no one. He had red rope coiled at his feet because the strong line was the only line left, and because he had not received letters meant for sisters. The ice made a corridor, and he followed it until the lake opened like a hand that has decided to slap. He paid out the sounding line, 6 feet, 12, 18. At 24, the line went slack as if a stairwell had opened below. He leaned over, listening as if a depth could make sound. It did, humming, faint, insistent, the vibration of bees in a wall deciding who they are. "Ruth," he said to the water, not expecting, not ready for an answer. "Jonah." Not from below, from behind. Alma Pike stood on the shore in her cloak, the hem wet with wrong. "You'll build a bridge," she said, nodding at the red coil. "You knew I'd come. Boys are clocks," Alma said. "You wind them, they go." He almost laughed. He did not. "Help me," he said instead. "I came to stop you," she said, and then, because she was a teacher and you cannot stop a clock by scolding the hour, "tie the line to me. If they pull, they get an old maid first." He stared at her. "That's not wise, no, effective, perhaps." She lashed the rope around her waist and braced herself on a birch with roots like a hand hungering for a grip. Jonah cast the free end into the dark, not as a gift, but as a dare. The red sank with silly cheer. The humming grew louder, richer, as if the line had tuned the lake to the key of yes. 3 notes close as breath rose under the hull. "Come," Alma swore in a vocabulary she reserved for splinters and doctrinaires. "Back," she said. Jonah backed water. The line went taut, not a fish, not a snag, a polite but unyielding pull, like a usher with a hand on your elbow, "this way." "Sir," Alma dug in her heels. Bark came away in her hands. "Cut it," she said through her teeth. "It's the only strong line," he said, stupid with hope. Alma did not ask permission. She drew her knife and severed the rope. The water took the red like candy, and the humming subsided into exactly what night sounds like when it remembers it is not alone. Jonah's face broke and remade itself. "She's there," he said, not a question, a geography. "Yes," Alma said. "Because lying to boys is like throwing bread to a river, and we will not go to her like this." When they returned, Mara stood at the door as if she had been invented for doorways. She looked at Jonah's empty hands. She looked at Alma's wet hem. She looked past both of them to the space behind, where the dark waited like a student, certain the answer would come if it only raised its hand longer. "Inside," she said, before the bell remembers. "Inside," me held out her wrist. Around it lay a faint red ring, no thicker than a hair, a blush that was not skin and not paint. It had not been there at supper. It did not smudge when Mara rubbed it with vinegar. It did not sting. "I burned the thread," me whispered. "The lake counts in more ways than one," Alma said, and wanted to bite her own tongue off for saying it aloud. Silas reached for his sister's hand. His palm looked very small against the red. "Does it mean?" "It means we know where it will try," Mara said, "and we will not be there." She turned to the harmonica and set her fingers to glass, backward 3. The bowls sang "stay, stay, stay" in the only grammar that mattered. From the walls came one long tone, "listen." The house listened. The wind listened. The bell for that night kept its counsel. Quiet, not peace quiet, the kind that checks the locks twice.